goodness gracious, it's not. Okay, everything I just said was lost to the internet. I hope that the silent part will get edited out. We're talking about Ecclesiastes tonight. And I guess just tonight what we're going to do is we're going to look at what the book is about and try to look at some of the main points and hopefully get a better understanding of what God was trying to tell us in this book. It's always important and always profitable to look at what God is trying to say to us. Our first and foremost goal in reading the Bible should be to learn about who God is and about what He wants to tell us. And from there we can extrapolate who we are supposed to be. The book of Ecclesiastes has, it's just in introducing ourselves to the book, we talk about things like authorship and situation. We don't know precisely who the author was. Solomon's the most popular choice, and that may be right. I don't know. If you ask me one day of the week, I think it's Solomon. You ask me another day of the week, I don't think it's Solomon. So that's how I don't think in the long run that it really makes a big difference who wrote the book, though, because it ultimately comes from God. The book itself doesn't actually say a name. It refers to someone called the preacher. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And the son of David is probably the most compelling argument for Solomon. In chapter 1 and verse 16, he describes how he has excelled all those around him in wisdom, and he has great wealth. This becomes evident in chapter 2. This fits Solomon. Solomon definitely fits the profile. Of course, he never actually comes out and says, this is Solomon. And verse 12 seems to indicate I have been king in Jerusalem, which is sometimes taken to mean he's not king anymore when he writes it. And some passages imply previous kings and critiques of kings and all that, which sounds a little strange coming from somebody who's part of a newly established monarchy in Israel. So at the end of the day, we don't know, and we shouldn't make a big test of fellowship out of thinking or not thinking that Solomon wrote this. But more important is its place in the canon of the Bible. It is what we would call a book of wisdom. What is wisdom? Well, wisdom literature, among other things, wrestles with this question of, I guess, how to be successful in life. And we really should kind of view it in comparison to Proverbs. I guess that's the most helpful analogy I can come up with. The book of Proverbs has this basic logic. If you do wise things, your life will be good. That's the book of Proverbs in a nutshell. If you do wise things, if you obey God, if you follow all of God's commandments, then everything will go well for you. It pays to serve God. And while the law of Moses said you don't commit adultery because the penalty for that is death, the book of Proverbs says don't commit adultery, because if you do, the jealous husband will hunt you down and kill you. That's the wisdom literature. If you do bad things, bad stuff's going to happen to you. And if you do good things, people will reward you. The book of Ecclesiastes says something a little different. It says that even if you do wise things, life won't necessarily be that good for you. It's not always going to go that great. Even if you do wise things and you obey God, you're probably going to suffer anyways. And so there's really not a comparative earthly life advantage to be found in serving God. And well, Proverbs says it pays to serve God. Ecclesiastes say it really doesn't pay to serve God. That's kind of strange to find in the Bible, isn't it? We're going to talk about that. The book of Job also wrestles with this question. And Job was kind of like the narrative form of this thinking. Because Job is a wise and righteous man. You know, he's more righteous than anybody, and he loses everything and suffers intensely. And so the first thing that happens when he's gone through all of these horrible things is his friends show up, and after they sit with him for a while, and Job breaks the silence and starts lamenting, his friends start kind of talking to him a little bit. And if you read their speeches, it sounds an awful lot like the book of Proverbs. Hey, Job, well, you know why people suffer? They suffer because they do bad stuff. I mean, you're basically reaping what you sow, Job. Just saying, don't you know how it works? The problem is that the friends are wrong. Even though they're quoting the Proverbs, they assume, they commit the fallacy of affirming the consequent. They assume that because bad stuff happens to Job, that automatically means he's done something wrong. Well, that clearly doesn't fit Job's situation, and it clearly doesn't fit every situation in life. They take the Proverbs and they apply them as if they were absolutes with no exceptions whatsoever. That's not how to read wisdom literature. That wasn't how to read it back then. It's still not how we should read it today. We need to understand and appreciate this context of the Bible before we move forward. Now, that doesn't mean that Proverbs doesn't have anything valuable to say. It does. It has quite a lot of good things to say. It has good advice. Ecclesiastes has something to say too. We need to listen to it. The book, if you want to talk about the contrast between them, Proverbs gives you all the answers. Ecclesiastes leaves you with a bunch of questions. Proverbs gives you general principles. Ecclesiastes gives you the exception to every rule under the sun. You see that what I did there? Proverbs says wisdom is a good thing that you should pursue. Ecclesiastes says wisdom is overrated and really won't get you everything you need to get. In Proverbs, people get justice. In Ecclesiastes, people get inequity. In Proverbs, age is a good thing. You should listen to your elders. In Ecclesiastes, your elders don't really know that much. Not a good thing. Now, at first glance, the book comes across as really, really pessimistic. Anybody who reads passages like this will get the point here. Let's just read some of these passages to kind of convey this thought. In chapter 4, it says, I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. So I congratulated the dead, who are already dead, more than the living, who are still living. But better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. That sound like a guy that's happy to be alive? What about chapter 6? In verses 1 through 6, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, then I say, better the miscarriage than he. For it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. And on and on. We're not going to read all of the passages I put up here. The book is perplexing to people because of the cynical tone, because of the pessimism that pervades it. The man who wrote this seems to think that life is grievous and depressing. And people don't want to live with that reality, do they? Does that sound exciting? Does that sound like the sort of thing we want to talk about in church? We'd rather sing I'm happy today than I'm crying today. Well, now some people, and some well-meaning people have used this cynicism or this pessimism to actually try to deny what the book says. And, so what they'll do is they'll say, well, the beginning of the book mentions says it's the words of the preacher, and then the last 6 verses of the book say that, or are an epilogue by a guy that's different from the preacher, and they basically say that, the preacher was a smart guy, but he didn't know anything, and you really should fear God and keep His commandments, and just don't listen to anything that I wrote here. Essentially, this interpretation says that everything but the last 6 verses is wrong. The problem with that is that, well, it's running away from what the text says, really. There's not really a good basis for believing that, and it's not a ground. The pessimism of the book is not a grounds for denying what the book says. Our minds want to reject it, as is typical of human nature when it is confronted with the Word of God. But we should never reject what God has said just because our thinking gets challenged. Now, how do we deal with that? How do we confront that? Well, the cynicism here is there, but it's designed to teach us something very fundamental about life and about what it is. And if I were to sum up the point of the book to one thing, it is this: earthly life is vanity. Don't make too much of this life. This book is about how to live your life Under the sun. And there's an expression that's used throughout the book called life under the sun. Chapter 1 and verse 3, what advantage does a man have in all his work which he does under the sun? Verse 14, I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. And chapter 2, verse 11, I considered my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. What does that expression mean, life under the sun? Effectively, all it's saying is life on earth. You know, where is under the sun? Well, pretty much anywhere that you're on the earth, you're under the sun. Now, is life under the sun a bad thing? Well, no, it's not a bad thing. It's just overrated is all. That's the real point here. You know, it's not that there's bad, it's all misery and suffering. That's not what he's saying in this book. He's just saying it's vanity. It's not that you'll never be happy, but it's that there'll never be real purpose. Now there's an important piece of advice in that. People try to milk life for more than it's worth. Now, people make more of earthly life than they should, especially people who aren't following the Lord. But even among Christians, you'll see this sometimes. The idea that, you know, you got to milk life for all it's worth. You got to have huge goals. You got to have huge ambitions. You got to have great dreams and accomplishments. You got to have a bucket list of all the stuff you want to do before you die. But you know what the reality is that if you approach life with that kind of thinking, you're going to be disappointed. Wisdom will not make your life meaningful. And that's the point of the first chapter. It'll make you smart, but it'll also make you miserable in the process. You'll have to put up with how foolish everybody else is. In chapter 1 and verse 18, it says, in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in pain. Pleasure will not make your life meaningful either. Even though it'll make you happy, yeah, but you won't get very wise in the process. You can accumulate a bunch of stuff for yourself. Guess what will happen when you accumulate all that stuff? Well, one day you're going to die. And all that stuff, what's going to happen to it? Well, you really don't know. You have no control over it, really. Oh, sure, you can get a lawyer, and you can write out a last will and testament, and you can, you know, micromanage all of your possessions and say, you know, they're going to end up with this person and this person and this person. I'm cutting this person out of my will, and I'm going to make sure that nobody gets any of this. But guess what? You have no control, really. You don't know, I mean, first of all, will they faithfully even execute your will in the first place? And even if they do, what will happen 1 nanosecond after all the stuff's divided up? I know you left the farm to me, but I feel like selling it. No real way around that, is there? No matter what you do, you will not be able to control what happens after you've gone. Now, if that sounds like stuff you read in other parts of the Bible, you are right to see that. Jesus makes the same point in Luke chapter 12, doesn't he? When he's talking about the parable of the rich fool, the guy is going on about how, you know, I've got this great surplus of harvest. I know what I'll do. I'll build bigger barns and put my stuff in there. And Jesus says, you fool, this night your life is required of you. Who then will inherit what you have built, what you have made? One of the reasons why we have to take Ecclesiastes seriously is because Jesus kind of took it seriously. Because you look at what he said, what he taught, you know, he doesn't ever explicitly quote from it, but he alludes to it quite a bit in, you know, passages like the Sermon on the Mount and in some of his parables. Jesus seems to think this book had something to say. Ultimately, this book brings up a lot of illustrations to make a point. He'll quote something and you'll see that and you'll go, that kind of thing happens all the time. That shouldn't be the way it is, but it is. Chapter 4, verse 8, for instance, says that there was a certain man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother, yet there was no end to all his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? This too is vanity, and it is a grievous task. You ever see that? You ever see somebody who practically worked themselves to death for no reason? Didn't even bother to question why? That kind of thing happens all the time. This isn't something that's new. What about money lovers? How often do they go unsatisfied? Chapter 5 and verse 10, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. The thing about rich people, You want to know something about rich people? They always want more. There's always, they got their money, yeah, but they're not happy with what they got. They want more of what they've got. It's all about making it bigger. The book uses this word vanity a lot. Some versions may say meaningless or futility or various other things. The word for vanity is a term that means a Hebrew term that means breath. It's less common than the other Hebrew term, which is sometimes translated wind or breath or spirit, but they're both used throughout this book. Vanity, it's like chasing the wind. The expression striving after the wind. You see that sometimes in the book, don't you? You ever try to catch the wind and hold it? How do you do that? I don't know. It's like trying to solve a problem like Maria. It's not possible. What do you get there? The idea is that there's no advantage to earthly life. There's no profit to anything. You'll never really grasp onto anything of substance, even no matter how hard you try. And he uses this expression in chapter 1 and verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. You can talk about vanity. You know the expression king of kings means somebody that's a king that's greater than all other kings. Or the expression lord of lords is talking about a lord that's greater than all other lords. Vanity of vanities, talking about a vanity that is so much greater and so much more vain than all other vanities. And that's how he describes life. That's what earthly life is. Earthly life is the vainest thing possible because you won't ever gain anything or accomplish anything or get anywhere. Now that is kind of a hard thing to deal with. But let's not misunderstand him. If we go through the book, we'll get a better idea of what it means. Some people, and I kind of used to say this a little bit, but some people, they read Ecclesiastes and they walk away and they think, well, the point of the book is nothing will ever make you happy. That's not the point of the book. The point of the book is not that you can't be happy in life. On the contrary, the book actually has several sections that tell you exactly how to be happy. You want to be happy in life? Look at 2:24 through 26. But the point is not a lack of happiness, but a lack of meaning. In chapter 2, in verses 24 through 26, he says, there is nothing better for a man to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I've seen, for it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? But to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. While to the sinner, he has given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. So yeah, he says you can be happy. Your happiness will be vanity, but you can be happy. Chapter 3, verse 12. I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There's nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear Him. And that which is has already been, and that which will be has already been. For God seeks what has passed by. Chapter 9, and verse 7. Go then, eat your bread in happiness. Drink your wine with a cheerful heart. For God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the woman with whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which He has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Enjoy yourself. So the point of this book, when it says vanity, is not you can never be happy. It's just your happiness won't have any real meaning. It won't have any real substance to it. Or to put it another way, the book is not really about how you feel. That's not the point. It's not about your feelings. It's about value. Don't let your feelings be the judgment for your value in life. Because why? Because feelings lie to you. That's why. You can't trust your feelings. Most of the people who have vain lives don't even realize that their life is vanity. They don't realize that they're striving after the wind. They might be contented for a while with how they live. Hey, I'm perfectly fine with myself. And then they get to the end and, they realize it's all vanity. And what makes life vanity isn't the way you feel. It's the fact that at the end of it, you will eventually die. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. There's nothing you can do to reverse it. You can enjoy things in passing, but you can't take away the vanity that is brought by death. And it's there. And it's real. I dare say most people don't live with that perspective. They live with the perspective of, that all of, they're living for the weekend, or for next month, or for the paycheck, or whatever it is. Perhaps if you get older, you start to reflect on your mortality a little more. But most people, they continue to live life regularly, day in and day out, without a real reflection on the fact that in 100 years, I'm not going to be here. And no one's going to really know who I am. There might be a few nerds who research genealogy and learn something interesting and know my name in 100 years. But are they going to know who Wayne Welsh was? No, not really. They're not going to know what kind of personality I had. They're not going to know what I like to eat. They're not going to know the things like what movies I enjoyed watching or what I like to do while I was watching movies. They're not going to know about all my little quirks and eccentricities. I'll just be a name and a couple of dates to some people, and to them, most people, I won't even be that. Mankind has a very fleeting memory. Most of the time, if you get remembered for stuff, it's not good. Like Adolf Hitler. Everybody knows who he is, but that's not a good thing. He had a bad life. So, ultimately, you can't take away the vanity. Life is a mixture. Some of it's enjoyable, some of it's sad. And we need to be realists instead of optimists or pessimists. Don't place all your hope in this life, but don't despair of it either. Don't try to grab all the gusto you can get, because that's vanity. But don't become an ascetic or a hermit either, because that's vanity too. I want to note just some key observations that I think really drive the point home in this book. And this isn't everything the book has to offer, but it's just kind of get the wheels turning a little bit and try to understand where this author is coming from. First of all, one thing that's key to understanding how this mindset works is that there really is no such thing as novelty. There's nothing new. That's something that I think Christians really need to get their heads around. That there genuinely is nothing new under the sun. No passage drives this home more than the opening text of the book. I'm going to read verses 3 through 11 of chapter 1. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place it rises there again. Blowing towards the south, then turning towards the north, the wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. There's not really a lot that's novel in that statement. He's just making an observation. Nature works in cycles. Water moves in cycles. The sun moves in a cycle. Technically, it's the earth rotating, but, from our perspective, that's what's going on. The sun moves in a cycle. Generations go in cycles. And the cyclical vanity of nature is matched by the cyclical nature of human life. All things are wearisome. Verse 8, man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be. That which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see this? It is new. Already it has existed for ages which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the latter things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who come later still. There is nothing new under the sun. Now that's a pretty bold contention to make from a pulpit while I'm giving this sermon off of an iPad. But you really think about it. We may have new technology. They were constantly inventing new things even back then. But there really is nothing new about human nature, is there? Mankind hasn't solved any of his real problems. Sin still exists, and it's still sin. No one ever got rid of that. Suffering is still suffering. Pleasure is still pleasure. Money is still money, and there are people who have it and there are people who don't, and there's inequity between them. And that hasn't changed. It's been that way since the beginning, really. The rich still abuse the poor, and people still sin. People are still addicted to the same stuff they've always been addicted to. sex and drugs and so on. We may have gotten more sophisticated in our ways of dealing with it, but we haven't changed. Human nature has not changed. There is no such thing as novelty. You know what? We have something called an election cycle. We call it, there's a reason it's called a cycle. It happens every 4 years, and it will never stop until something destroys it. And but you know what's amazing about it is that every time, and I'm saying this because it's relevant to our current situation, but every 4 years they say the same thing. This is the most important election of your lifetime. Just like the last one. The one before that. And the one before that. I guess they're incrementally all getting more important, right? Or maybe the guy who wrote Ecclesiastes knew what he was talking about. And it's just all vanity. And it's just cyclical. It's chasing after the wind. Now, the sun moves in a cycle too. And sometimes we go out and we watch the sunset. And it's nice. I like watching the sunset sometimes. But do I go home after watching the sunset and cry myself to sleep and obsess about it and, go on the internet and argue with people about the sun setting and how it was going to set and all the different ways that it was going to set? No, I don't do that. Why? Because it's just part of the cyclical vanity of life. I got news for you. It rose today just like it did yesterday, and it's set. It's going to set, Lord willing, in a couple of hours or so. And I imagine it will do just as good a job as it's always done. There's nothing wrong with stopping to look at it. But don't lose any sleep over it. It's the same thing with the cycles of human life. You can stop and take interest in it. You can have things to say about it, certainly. But don't make more of it than it is. The flip side's the case too. Some people like to think that, it's not just that there's no novelty, but that, everything is so much worse today than it was when I was a kid. You ever say that? I mean, I can say stuff like that sometimes, but I haven't. My childhood wasn't that long ago, comparatively speaking. I don't think there has ever been a time in human history where the older generation wasn't complaining about how much better stuff used to be. You can find it in historical records. Plato complained about it. How the young people, they just don't have any respect for the finer things of life. There's a whole rant in Plato about that. And I just kind of go, if the world were getting terrible, or we're getting worse and worse at the rate that everybody thinks it is, where would we be right now? We'll probably be destroyed. But the truth is that we tend to have a very poor memory when it comes to looking back on the past, and we tend to look at things through rose-colored glasses. The writer of Ecclesiastes critiques this way of thinking. He says that the end of a matter is better than the beginning. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry, for anger resides in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Not wise to obsess about the good old days. People do that nationally. People do that in the context of local churches too. How many times have people had the conversation, oh man, this church used to be so much better than it is right now. I got news for you. No church has ever grown with that attitude. It doesn't happen. Things get better because we look at God's Word and look at doing what it says. Things do not get better because we reminisce about the good old days when things were so much better than they could ever possibly be again. Not a good way to work. Not from wisdom that you ask this, the writer says. Secondly, I would say, if you're trying to be happy, complete happiness in life is impossible. It's not possible to be completely happy in life. And to address this, I want to look at a passage that is oft quoted and seldom understood in chapter 3. It's the passage that is so well known in Ecclesiastes that it even became the basis of that hit song, to everything turn, 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 there is a season. Let's read this. There's an appointed time for everything. There's a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. A time to search and a time to give up as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Now the point of that passage is not, oh, you need to do all things in moderation, or that you need to live a balanced life, whatever that is. It's not a list of things to pursue and avoid. It's telling you these are 14 opposite things, and they all have their time. Life is a mixture of all of these things. And guess what? You can't change it. You're going to have these things whether you want to or not. You could work really, really hard and try to push the balance in one direction or another, but you're never going to get rid of your sadness. And you're never going to get rid of war. And you're never going to get rid of tearing stuff apart and throwing stuff away and all of that. But on the other hand, you can be the worst person in the world and you'll never get rid of the good side of it either. You'll never really, there'll always be some source of happiness. And there'll always be some reason to keep things. And there'll always be some reason to show love and peace. Here's the problem. God made a time for everything, but God set timelessness in man's heart so that he couldn't figure out what time to act. What profit is there, verse 9, to the worker in that in which he toils? I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart. Yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Your toil amounts to guesswork. And that's the divine reality. So, well, what's the solution to that? Well, the solution is to find enjoyment in labor itself, as he says in verses 12 through 15. I know that there is nothing better than to rejoice, to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it. There is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that man should fear him. That which has been, well, that which is has been already, and that which will be has already been. For God seeks what has passed by. You know, the point of all that is stop trying to fix your life so that everything is perfect. Because it won't work. Be grateful to God when you have a good day. And when you have a bad day, well, still be grateful to God because he made that day too. Chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Consider the work of God, who was able to straighten what he has bent. In the day of prosperity, be happy. But in the day of adversity, consider, God has made one as well as the other, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. Sounds kind of like something Job said, doesn't it? When his wife was telling him, you've got all this misery happening to you. You need to curse God and die. Don't hold on to your integrity. Job said to her a very profound thing, taken from the wisdom of Ecclesiastes, or the other way around, depending on when you think Job was written. Shall we accept good from God and not adversity? He gave you both. He made both. He made everything appropriate in its time. It's not really quite the uplifting passage that some songs try to make it into. It's simply realistic, is what it is. Thirdly, I'd say life really isn't that fair. Now that sounds like, well, duh on the surface, but I think sometimes people forget life really isn't fair. And then, I gotta get justice for myself. Well, good luck. I mean, you can try. Won't always work out. Chapter 3, verse 16 says, I've seen under the sun that in the place of justice there's wickedness. In the place of righteousness there's wickedness. Sometimes judges are corrupt and they won't give you justice. Nothing you can do about it. Chapter 5 and verses 8 and 9, if you see the oppression of the poor and the denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight. For one official watches over another official. There are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. Guess what? The poor are always going to be oppressed. That doesn't mean you shouldn't help them. You should. But don't be surprised when you see that your efforts really don't fix the problem. They're not going to be fixing the problem. If you think the problem of poverty can be solved by human devices, well, you're probably in for a world of disappointment. There's no economic system that will fix that. It was devised by mankind. Another thing to point out, sometimes you do good deeds, you don't get recognized for it. Chapter 9 and verses 14 and 15 says that there was a small city with few men in it. And a great king came to it, surrounded it, and constructed large siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Yet no one remembered that poor man. Well, that didn't work out so great, is it? He doesn't get recognition, even though he saved all those people. Oh, and before we start getting all upset that life isn't fair, here's another thing to consider. You're not that good of a person either. I'm not that good of a person either. He brings that up in chapter 7. In verse 20, he says, "Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and never sins. Do not take seriously all words which are spoken, so that you will not hear your servant cursing you. For you also have realized that you likewise have many times cursed others." If you're the sort of person that wants to play tit for tat and make sure that nobody gets away with insulting me, is that really the philosophy you want to live by? Is that really the manner of living in which you want to act? What about all the times you said bad things about other people? What about all the bad things you've done in your life? You're not so perfect either. There's a reason that Jesus said, "Do not judge and you will not be judged. For whatever standard you use, it will be applied to you." Why did Jesus say that? Because that's how God's justice works. And since you're not perfect, perhaps you should be grateful that life really isn't fair. And since I'm not perfect, perhaps I should be grateful that life isn't fair. Because if life were fair, I'd be in a lot of trouble. The fourth thing, one that I think, again, we always need a reminder of. The future is not knowable. We can't know the future. I know a lot of people who try to predict the future. I know a lot of Christians who try to predict the future. Not a good idea. You'll never be right about it. If you are right about it, you are a lucky guesser. It's like, it's like if I just reach into a deck of cards and pull out one at random, there's a 1 in 52 chance that I'll get it right. People will be so amazed if they see me do it that one time and get it right? Well, you can do that same trick once a week. Every now and then somebody will be like, "Oh, that was amazing." But it was sheer guesswork. The same thing it is with predicting the future. Throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. In chapter 6 and verse 12, the writer asks, "Who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow, or who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun?" What do we know? And I'm not going to read all of 9:1 through 11:6 because it's long. But let's just basically point it out this way. Number one, we only know one thing about the future. There's one thing we know for certain. We will all die someday. Actually, we don't even know that. Jesus might come back before we die. But Jesus hadn't come when he wrote this. So you know you're going to die. And in the meantime, well, you're not really going to know what's going on when you're dead. And you're not going to know when you will die, whether it's today or tomorrow or 20 years or 30 years or 50 years from now. And people aren't really going to know you once you're dead. And you don't really know what bad things are going to happen in the meantime. And you really don't know what good things are going to happen in the meantime either. Chapter 11 in verses 1 and 2 talks about the bad end of it. "Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth." That's kind of a goofy sounding proverb. It's the Hebrew equivalent of "don't put all your eggs in one basket." Why? Because something bad might happen, and then you'll be really sorry you did that. You don't know what bad's going to happen. So divide your portion to 7 or even 8. You don't know what misfortune will occur on the earth. The reverse is true too. Look at 11 verse 6. "Sow your seed in the morning and do not be idle in the evening, for you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good." You don't know what good will come either. So you should work hard and try to produce something good, because you just might. The good that you do to others, you don't know where that's going to go. The people that you teach about the Lord, you don't know where that's going to go. The person that is, that person that you talk to about the Lord, you may not ever see them even get baptized. Maybe someone else will. And maybe they'll go on to have a family and have many children who go out and preach the gospel and change the scope of the landscape of Christianity for years to come. And you'll never see a lick of it and you'll never know what happened. Doesn't mean you should be idle. Just because you don't see the fruit of your labor doesn't mean that you should not labor. So what's the conclusion of the matter? Well, the conclusion of the matter, I think, is actually summed up well by the Apostle Paul. Paul sums it up well in two places. Number one, the creation is subject to vanity. In Romans chapter 8, in verses 20 and 21, the Apostle Paul writes that the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption, into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So Paul says, yes, that perspective on life is right. Life really is vanity, Paul says. But there is a hope that it will someday not be that when Jesus returns. Okay, but if creation is vanity, does that mean it's bad? No. The other point he makes in 1 Timothy 4 is that creation is still good because God made it. 1 Timothy 4, he says in verses 4 and 5, everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with gratitude, for it is sanctified by means of the Word of God and prayer. That's the perspective here. Don't live your life in such a way that you regret it. Don't live your life in such a way that you get to old age and you realize, I didn't do anything with myself. And don't live your life in such a way that when you enter judgment, you're going to go, oh, I lived my life totally the wrong way. And there's ways to regret yourself on both ends. In chapter 11 and verse 9 through 12 verse 1, he says, rejoice, young man, during your childhood. Let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. Follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all of these things. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no delight in them. On the flip side of that is, do what God says. At the very end, he says that the conclusion when all has been heard is this: fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Suddenly, here's another piece of information that we can know for certain, is that there will be a judgment. There will be a final reckoning. Now, he doesn't talk about judgment until the end of the book, but it's there. And all of that inequity, all of that unfairness, all of that stuff in life that doesn't quite work, the Lord is going to make it right. The question is, what's going to happen to us when He does that? Are we going to be one of the people that needs righting? Or are we going to be standing on the side of the right? C.S. Lewis wrote in a book called The Screwtape Letters. If you haven't read it, it's basically a series of letters exchanged between two demons trying to figure out how to tempt a man to go into hell. It's a fascinating read. But he said something in there that's always kind of struck me. In describing a newly arrived soul into hell, the man got there and said, I now see that I spent most of my life doing neither what I ought nor what I liked. Don't live your life in such a way that you will regret it. Enjoy it while you can, and do what God says, because there really is a judgment. You want your life to be not vanity? You want it to count for something? Keep that in mind. Live for the judgment. And if you're here tonight and you're not living your life in such a way so as on the great day of the judgment, He will find you to be right in His sight, and He will say, "Good, well done, good and faithful servant." If you're not headed on that path now, don't let the life of vanity turn into an eternal life of vanity. Make your life right with the Lord. If there's anything we can do to make that happen, let it be known. While together we stand and we